So welcome to our editorial seminar for community radio with Mentor Media Training. We've just done a bunch of introductions and we're welcoming some people from predominantly West Wilts Radio on this one, and a couple of colleagues as well who've come from Radio Bath. Four categories of interest that I want to then cover in this short seminar this evening include really the areas that we're interested in can be categorized in the following ways. Common sense, which is what most of the rules of broadcasting frankly are. And you'll know this from your own gut feeling when you present. And I think that the basic rule of thumb with that is, if you're in any doubt, leave it out. It's an old maxim in radio. If you're not sure, probably don't say it. Your gut is probably the best thing that will serve you there. And research it, look it up, come back to it another time, whatever that might be. The next area of interest really, or really, if you like, the next category in this, are guidelines. And these are guidebooks and, if you like, individual codes relating to certain organizations, like the Ministry of Defence, where they have a green book on media handling, plus other organizations who will have corporate policies on how to behave in the media. Your own radio station will have its own policy and corporate style and its own expectations of you. In a lot of cases, in terms of how it wants you to put the radio station's image across, and how it wants you to express, that its community approach, for example. So it might be that the idea is that you're including more guests, more community voice, more two-way interaction, that kind of thing. Maybe even going out on the street and talking to people. So this comes under guidelines, really, and they are not hard and fast rules, but they exist as a framework that you can operate in, but you generally don't get into a huge amount of trouble unless it's something like the MOD, where, say, somebody had died in a war. We used to have this with Afghanistan. When in journalism, obviously you must not name anybody, even if you know the name of somebody who's died, like somebody in Warminster or whatever, linked to the MOD. You wouldn't name them until you knew that the family and the MOD had named them first. And that's kind of standard convention stuff there. So those are guidelines. The next thing really comes under regulation and codes. And this is where it gets a bit more serious. So this is Ofcom, of course, who, as you know, are the government's regulator for communication in the UK, not just media. So that covers everything from telephones and social media policy and that sort of thing. And they regulate all community radio stations, and they operate a code which is quite simple to check out online. And there are 10 parts to that code, and much of that, when you read through it, is actually common sense. And we will cover some of that in a moment. The final thing, which gets really serious, and you can see this is kind of stepping up in intensity, and in terms of where we have to be aware of these different areas. If we're just doing a music show and a radio program, most of the stuff will fall into category 1 and 2, which is common sense and maybe some of the station guidelines. But where you're doing anything which might involve leading up to an election, local elections, of course, as well. Do you happen to have a councillor who presents a show like Radio Bath does? Are you interviewing a councillor? Or a local politician? Are you interviewing somebody with contentious views, that sort of thing? Then it comes under regulation and codes. And really, that's something I think everybody should have a good working understanding of before hitting the airwaves on any kind of show, really. Then the legal framework, that's where it gets much more serious, and obviously covers the laws of libel, the judiciary, and the courts, where a court judge might lift, for example, naming restrictions, like they did with the 17-year-old who was arrested and charged for the stabbings in Southport recently. And then, of course, you have contempt of court rules, which is if you happen to talk about a local court case that's taking place, or an arrest, or you give an opinion about someone who's been charged, then your station editor could be up before the judge, and Ofcom could step in. You could be in contempt of court, and the editorial, ultimately, this doesn't happen in community radio settings, but ultimately the editor of a newsroom or a radio station can be sent to jail, ultimately, for contempt issues. It can be that serious. Ofcom can also take you off the air with fines. They did it with Russia Today. They can fine you, and they can pretty much close you down with a financial penalty. So this stuff is serious, but it's not anything to be afraid of, because most of it comes back to number one. So let's just look at a few things. The Ofcom regulation code consists of 10 sections. We're just going to deal with a few of them really this evening. And some of these, let me just bring up there are a few key bits to it that I just wanted to cover off. Does anybody have any questions at this point, by the way? All good? Key parts of the Ofcom code include such things as, I'm just looking at the 1 to 10. Protecting under 18s. You might be presenting, as I occasionally present with my daughter. It's my choice to put her on air, but I wouldn't reveal too much about her life. And we have to be careful about other people that she's talking about who are under 18. So if you're broadcasting material that involves under 18s, you should be careful about how that's scheduled, what it contains, and that there isn't kind of identification of other minors without permission of their guardians or parents. So, and also matters relating to when children are listening. So if you do a show that has material with swearing in it, that's why obviously you'll be aware of things like the watershed, that kind of thing. It's the whole thing of after 9 o'clock, you know, and don't talk about sex at breakfast, you know, it's that sort of thing. So again, most of that is common sense, and obviously it also comes under taste and decency. Section 2 of the Ofcom code covers harm and offence. You mustn't cause public harm or offence deliberately, or glamorise violence or dangerous behaviour, offensive language, sex humiliation, or violation of human rights. Again, pretty obvious. Crime, disorder, hatred, and abuse is section 3. It speaks for itself. Section 4 is religion. And one thing I find quite interesting, and this is nuanced, by the way, is the fact that some people in an interview, and actually, believe it or not, Radio 2 listeners get very upset about this with the Radio 2 compliance management, is when people use phrases like God or Jesus Christ as a pejorative or swearing term on air. And funny enough, complaints to the BBC back in the day, you could get away with a few Fs and a few, you know, other choice swear words, but put blasphemy in there of any kind, and it can really upset people. So just being aware of that even as a presenter, even if you don't hold any religious belief of your own, be mindful of use of phrases and not sort of saying something like that could, because it can cause more offence than you may realise. One interesting note about religion, which is surprising, and in doing extra research on this, I've only recently discovered it is entirely illegal and against the Ofcom code to do a live exorcism on the radio. There you are. That's a tidbit that you probably weren't expecting to get tonight. You cannot, and claims that certain people possess special abilities cannot be broadcast when children are likely to be listening. What can you see? Can you see my sections here with the words on, or can you just see the slides at the moment?
Just the slides.
That's fine.
Yeah, just seeing the slides at the moment, Dave.
Yeah, that's all right. I'll just whiz through these other bits. Due impartiality and accuracy, I'll come to in a moment, because that's very important. And the key there is the word due. Elections and referendums, we've kind of been through that. And the policy that Radio Bath took was, if in doubt, we're going to leave it out. We're not even going to talk about elections. It's an election-free zone. The simple rule of elections really is you can have candidates on and interview them, and you don't have to have a stopwatch and give them exactly the same seconds, but you must give the option for all the candidates that are in that election to appear. So any of you who are station managers or who are running the station or organisation, it's just worth knowing. And it doesn't have to be in the same programme. What it needs to be is in the same series of programmes over a number of weeks leading up to the election. So over the course of, say, a 5-week election period, if it's local elections or national ones, as long as you're allowing and getting different people and different candidates from the different parties, and proactively giving the opportunity for them to come on, and you give them a roughly similar time slot, morning or afternoon, and you give them approximately the same amount of time that which is deemed reasonable for them to make their point, then you can get councillors and politicians on as much as you like, as long as everyone gets a fair crack of the whip. So that, again, that's nothing to be worried about. It's just worth checking it before you do that. And then it comes section 7 of Ofcom is about fairness, and you just need to treat people and organizations fair and justly. And they should be told what they're expected to contribute in your program, whether live or recorded, whether or not there are any changes to the nature of their appearance on the program, and any obligations, such as confidentiality. They might tell you something in confidence. It's important to not breach that and to treat them fairly if they've given you that in advance. Section 8, privacy, I'm going to come to separately because that's changed recently and that's really important. And then section 10 is commercial communications on radio. That's to do with spot advertising. And actually, that's something that I think sometimes I hear community stations falling foul of, making it clear that adverts need to be kept clearly separate from other content. And yet sometimes I've heard presenters going from a piece of music and they go straight into an advert without saying anything. That's actually not allowed. And also there should be clear delineation between news bulletins, advertising, and any editorial that you're doing. So you shouldn't really ever hear a piece of music going into an advert without anything being said, strictly speaking. It doesn't matter an awful lot. And sometimes when there's a sweeper between it, sometimes you hear something that might say the music, then this is Radio Bath, or this is Westport's Radio, and then the commercial. Obviously in automation, you can't stop that. So that has to happen. But that's why you have those buffers of those jingle/sweepers between music and the adverts. And that's why those are there, partly because the Ofcom rules about making it very clear what is commercial and being sold and what is editorial and what is music. It shouldn't be a jumble. Is all of that reasonably clear? Any questions so far?
No, that's all very clear so far, Dave, and thank you for explaining that, because I didn't know that was the case.
Okay.
I didn't
No,
know. I didn't actually know that that's why you had, the sweepers and the buffers, as you say.
yeah.
We probably don't necessarily do so much of that on West Wilts Radio because of the way the system is set up.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's just a consideration. I mean, it doesn't mean you'll get fined, but if somebody decided to go, make a point of it and saying, I can't tell the difference between your programming and your adverts, it would be, worth. Now I'm just going to make this shareable. I wasn't able to see my screen a moment ago. I'm just going to share this again with you. But yeah, sometimes it's a style thing with radio stations that you think, oh, it's just they're just putting an advert for the sake of it. But actually, it's not. It's more than that. It's really because it's required of you to delineate. There needs to be a clear distinction between commercials and editorial and adverts. It's why you should speak into an ad break. So that was Billy Joel. Coming up in a minute, it's Taylor Swift after this, and then you are clearly identifying that it's an ad break. You shouldn't just let it run. Strictly speaking, and automation should take account of that. So we covered the 10 sections of Ofcom. That's the quickest rattle through I think probably ever done of that. Leveson 1 and 2 were interesting. Let's get on to privacy. This is quite juicy. Now, it's not something you might actually ever be involved in actively doing, but I think it's very important that we all know what the rules are regarding privacy. And I'll tell you why. Because when Cliff Richard versus the BBC happened, we probably, if we were on the radio live at the time, would have all talked about it. And there is a danger there that if we spoke about, say we'd all known about Hugh Edwards' arrest last November, and that had leaked, and any of you had seen that on social media last November and said, oh, Hugh Edwards has been arrested by the Metropolitan Police for a second time. I've just seen that on social media. Can I just see a show of hands for anyone if you'd seen that on social, or if you'd seen that by another news organisation last November? Hands up anyone who thinks that would have been okay to mention it. Actually, I'm just going to go down because I can't see Tim there. There's not a single show of hands, which means you're all excellent with your gut instincts. And it's probably because of what you know now as well, and hindsight's useful. But you're quite right. When someone has been arrested, you cannot identify them. Now, 10 years ago, there are what my old editor at ITV in Bristol used to talk about degrees of contempt. If it was in the public domain and everyone was talking about the fact that Cliff Richard had been arrested, actually everyone reporting his name was so much out there, as in you couldn't get that back. It was so widely known about that you are unlikely to be sued by Cliff Richard for mentioning the fact that outlets were reporting that Cliff Richard had been arrested. Strictly speaking, that was contempt, and everybody was in contempt. And I also refer you to the social media landmark case of Lord McAlpine after Jimmy Savile and others, where Sally Bercow tweeted, I wonder why Lord McAlpine is trending today. Serious face. He sued her for £100,000 for that. And that comedian, Alan, what's his face from QI, and several others retweeted her and all had to pay between £10,000 and £25,000 damages in a landmark case about retweeting a libelous remark. So if you say something that you see on Twitter, you are repeating a libel, and you can be sued, and the actual radio station can be sued. Now, there are plenty of celebrities out there who are prepared to do that and are litigious, and £10,000 to £20,000, £25,000 libel lawsuit from an individual would be enough to shut a community station down. So we have to be just aware of those things. So we can't identify anyone when they've been arrested. And when they've been charged, you can name them, but you can only name who they are, their age, what their address is. They'll give their address so that it doesn't misidentify them, as in from such and such a street in Basildon. They've been charged with this, and this, and their plea is X, or they will appear in court on such and such a day. Then you stop, and you cannot say anything more about that person once they've been charged. What's interesting when we look at the Hugh Edwards case from only the other week was that he was charged. They talked about what the build up to the case and some other things that had gone on. Then when he pleaded guilty. It was open season because he pleaded guilty. So the whole of the media went crazy for the story once he entered his plea of guilty. If he'd entered a plea of not guilty, everything would have shut down. Okay, because he would have not got a fair trial. So the rules of court reporting are clear. Since Leveson, Hacktoff, Hugh Grant, and the right to privacy, let's imagine a quick scenario for you, and let's get some contributions from you here. Let's imagine that Ricky Gervais, the comedian, has been filmed or photographed on social media outside of the Theatre Royal in Bath, being arrested by police and bundled into a police car. And you've seen this circulating on social media. It's really juicy. There's a photograph. It looks like Ricky Gervais, and it's all over social, and it's in Bath, or it's in, part of Wiltshire. It's in Bradford-on-Avon. Would you go on air and report that? Shout out, anyone.
Well, you'd be really tempted to, Dave.
I'd want to. I would want to say. There's a famous comedian, from The Office, has been all over social media, has been arrested by police this afternoon. There's photographs of him being bundled in the back of a cab and driven off, and everybody's talking about it.
But we don't know journalism, Dave.
But where do we stand on this? What would you do? Go on.
You can't
Wouldn't
really
you be?
say
Sorry,
that it's
Sally.
somebody. Sorry, if you if it's only a thought that somebody looks like them, you can't really say it's them, can you?
No, until it's verified. There's a lot of mischief and, as you know, very bad behavior on social media. And even the other week with the young man who was identified by a judge even though he was underage over the Southport stabbings. That 17-year-old was underage and named by a judge to protect misidentification of other potential youngsters. And one other young man had, in that case of the Southport stabbings, been attacked. So the judge was concerned that other people would be misidentified and potentially attacked or come to harm because of misidentification. So you're quite right. I think, Paul, you were going to say something as well.
I was going to say, just from rules of journalism, from when I've done print and radio journalism courses in the past and God knows what, and my media degree, you have to corroborate your sources at least twice, or even perhaps more times before you run with any story, because it could be fabricated, it could be misinformation. But the thing about social media is it's very easy to create things on the social media now, especially with artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
You can fabricate things, and people just follow the agenda, the narrative, and go with it, and we all get into trouble. So,
oh, quite right. So, and especially with AI. So,
yeah.
it's always been lots of single source journalism has been a norm for 10 years now, but it's really dangerous. And when I was at the BBC, it had to be that you had to have two independently verifiable sources to back up your story. And we should hold to that. We should all stick to that and go, I'm not sure about that thing I've seen. I'd love to talk about it. You could, I suppose, if you wanted to be salacious, you could say there's something going around on social that a comedian has been, arrested in Bath, and you keep it very generic. But then arguably, what's the point of saying it at all? You come back to the if in doubt, leave it out piece. So it can be very tricky. So if that's our scenario and it's Ricky Gervais, getting into a brawl and being bundled into a cab or something in Bath, for example, then unless the police, and you could do this, and this was an issue also the other week regarding the Southport piece, unless the police themselves confirm the identity of the person in question. And I know that investigators last November, the Sun and others, were trying to get the Met Police to confirm Hugh Edwards' name. And they went to court and they were trying to run the story. And in the end, actually, the balance was over Hugh Edwards and his family and his wife and his children's privacy superseded the public interest. And we're coming on to another very important point in all of this as well, by the way. And that is this crucial line. What is of interest to the public in a court of law and in libel and in other situations, especially if somebody decided to sue, is not the same as in the public interest. And this is something that few people realize when it comes to broadcasting. We all think, because it's on social media and everyone's talking about it, that that's of interest to the public. Well, yes, it might well be, but a judge won't stand for that, because is it in the public interest? And if that person's privacy or reputation or harm to them or their family could happen because of something that is being said and repeated, then it's not in the public interest. And there, with these newer laws since Leveson, their privacy since Cliff Richard versus the BBC supersedes that, and since the hacking situation. So this is where things have been updated, and things are much tighter around mentioning celebrities or arrests. We used to get away with talking about people being arrested. As I say, the degrees of contempt of court that you would get away with up to a point because everyone was talking about it. That's no longer true, and it's much tighter now. So I think it's important to understand what's of interest to the public is not the same as in the public interest. And you would have to have a very strong public interest argument to make that before defending why you've named a certain person of interest. And the case here, of course, is that 17-year-old, the naming of the 17-year-old charged with 3 counts of murder in Southport of Axel Migamwa Rodakubana. They said born 7th of August. Judge lifted reporting restrictions because there was potential harm to other people and misidentification. It's a very unusual step. So key areas then Hang on, sorry. Next one. Fair, accurate, and impartial. Due impartiality means we have to just ensure that we are being as fair and impartial as possible across the general story that we're talking about. So if somebody comes onto your organization as a guest and basically says all water companies are corrupt, no question, it's my opinion, they're all corrupt, they're all thieves, what would you say? Would you say, yeah, that's fair enough, okay? Or would you say, oh, hang on a minute, I didn't know you were going to get into that coming on the show? I would say we should challenge them.
Well, I would challenge them to, you know, what evidence do they have that that is the case?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So you should push back and say, well, obviously there are counter arguments to that. You're making a general comment about all water companies. You need to be more specific, and you should challenge anybody as a guest who says anything which just rings an alarm bell for you, just like down the pub, that sounds contentious or isn't backed up by something which is evidence or fact. The other thing you should also do is contest those facts and say, well, of course, there are other opinions or there are other views. So due impartiality, and the key is the word due, is you can't give every bit of detail, okay, about a whole story. The media and Ofcom knows this, so they know that if you're referring to something in the newspaper, you're only giving a snapshot, and you just need to give a snapshot on both sides. Do you understand what we mean when we're saying due there? You can't give every single little bit of detail ad infinitum because you'd be there all night. So what they mean by due is you're giving the story its due by saying, look, there are other pins the other side of this. You know, let's take, you know, low traffic neighborhoods that are going on in Bath at the moment. Very contentious issue. 4,000 signing a petition. There are arguments on both sides. For impartiality, you might say, by the way, you can also give an opinion and express a view as a presenter, but you must also say, this is my view at the start. I've tried driving around Bath. It is a bit of a nightmare. I know there's been 4,000 people who've signed this petition against this low traffic neighborhood. You know, I'm myself finding it difficult to get around Bath at the moment. But on balance, this is say you're on air, there are arguments on both sides, and plenty of people who live in those houses are much happier now. Of course, their roads are quieter. So this is a debate that will rage on. And there you are, in 25 seconds, I've given a bit of personal opinion, but said it's my view. I've given one side of the argument saying very contentious, 4,000 people are really against it, you kind of know how they feel. But for the people living in those houses, must be great. You're giving some sense of being fair and giving both sides, even in a 30-second almost soundbite like that. So does that make sense to people? You are allowed to put your opinion across, as long as you state, by the way, that it's your personal opinion. And here's a point, not the opinion of the radio station. And news outlets and radio stations cannot and must not have fixed opinions about such things as politics, political parties, politicians, and particular issues in your area, unless you are deciding to get behind a campaign. I mean, you're not a news outlet, you're a radio station. So if you're campaigning for, something in your organization that's going to have positive effects on the community, that's a bit different to saying West Wilts Radio supports the Green Party, and many of the things that the Green Party stand for in West Wilts are great, and we support that. That would be a fixed position, and you're not allowed to hold that or maintain that. But you could have a campaigning view over, let's all get behind Dorothy House. Do you know what I mean? It's the men's walk this Saturday. We're all getting excited about an event or an issue or something that positively brings the community together. I can tell that you're nodding. You can all tell the difference between that, and it's that fixed stance and that fixed position thing that's important to mention there. It's a useful nuance. Paul, go ahead.
So if you were having your own opinion on a subject, like you said, the water companies sort of mucking up the rivers and saying, this is my opinion, could you also get out of not having them on the line as well, the water company, by saying, we approached them for Wessex Water for comment, but are unable to receive a comment, from Wessex Water. Could you cover your back that way?
Yeah, as long
Obviously,
as, yeah, you
yeah.
can, as long as you have actually tried to contact them.
Ah. But
And
how do
they,
they know how do they know you've not done that, even
well,
if you haven't?
no, you have to have tried,
You have to
because
have tried, right? Okay.
there'll be an email or a call put in,
Right.
and
Okay. All right.
the journalist would log that you've tried to call them, or you've sent them an email saying, "Hi, can you just give us a statement regarding this?"
Yeah.
Um, and some broadcasters and journalists and media outlets only give organizations an hour to respond before they go with the story, deliberately sometimes, so they run them close to time. They know they're not going to get response, but they say at the time of going to press or coming on air, they still hadn't responded to our inquiry, but they
Okay, but you've
deliberately.
got to make that inquiry in the first place. I
You have
understand now.
Well,
Brilliant, brilliant.
no, you don't. You don't if you're just a presenter making a comment on air. If you're
Okay.
saying there's a piece in the local gazette this week that says local water companies are discharging,
Too much.
more effluent into
Yeah.
river in Bradford on Avon than ever before, you can say that and
Mm.
say, and that's just reportage. It's in the media, and it's also a fact that is not up for dispute.
Right.
So if those facts have been verified, and it is an indisputable fact that
Mm.
that water company has discharged more, or that an organization has done something wrong, you can say that. You should be careful of the source where you're saying it from. You should check that it's a proper journalistic source. But you can, of course we all mention things out in the newspapers.
Yeah, yeah,
Great, I've done it all my broadcasting life, and reported what others are
yeah,
saying. But
yeah.
probably the best way around that, Paul, is to say, according to the local newspaper.
Right.
You know, well, something I've seen, according to local press this week, there's a piece
Yeah.
around blah 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 blah, and they're saying this.
Post, whatever, Bristol Post, whatever. Yeah. Online.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or Bath Chronicle. You don't have to
Oh,
have
yeah.
then gone
Yeah.
to the water company yourself to say that,
Mm.
and I'm sure
Okay.
you've done that, and that's all right. The other thing is your guests might offer a view, but of course we covered the bit you need to challenge them, or if there are facts are contested about things like climate change, you might then just say, well, look, hang on, I'll just stop you there. There are other views on that, and I think I just need to provide some balance here. There are people that would strongly disagree with your opinion there about X, and da 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 da. And the other way you can deal with that one as well is to say, look, I'm sorry, you're criticizing the local NHS here. You've just criticized our local hospital, coming on this program. They haven't had the opportunity to come on to respond to that. So, just in the interest of fairness, um, from their point of view, they might say blah blah blah, and you should try and put an alternative opinion.
Even if you haven't had them, so even if you haven't had a comment, Dave, sorry, if you haven't had a comment, then
But you could put,
email, but what return back from them. Even if you haven't had one, you can say, like I've heard Five Live them do it all the time. Stephen Nolan do it and say, well, you can't. To be fair to, they're not here to react to that comment
yeah,
on a
that's right.
phone or something.
Yeah,
They're not
that's
here to
right.
reply.
They're
There's no
not
right
here
to
to
reply.
reply. They're not here to reply to that comment. So, and I can't speak for them, but what organisations like that might say, so that's about balance and fairness, and that's the fair, accurate, and impartial bit. And as long as you're doing that, when somebody says something on the airwaves on a show,
Yeah.
as long as you do that, you are absolutely fine, and none of you will get into any kind of bother at all because you've tried. You said, then look, they're not here to put their point of view. Maybe they didn't have enough time, or maybe perhaps there's a reason why they weren't able to do that. So I'll just move on from that. Da da da. And that can happen with something that somebody says live on your sports program, Paul. It could be innocuous.
Mm.
It could be
Mm.
somebody criticizing the training regime of the University of Bath or something.
Yeah.
The sports training regime, and you think it's an innocuous interview, but they could say something like that, and suddenly
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
could easily turn contentious in the sports situation.
Yeah.
So I hope
Yeah.
that's useful to you, because that gives
That's
that.
excellent. Yeah, it's a world of politics, isn't it? Really. I mean, you don't think sport is going to be that diverse, but it about winning and losing. But it's not just
Yeah,
winning and losing, is it? No.
no, it's realpolitik. because everything is ultimately has a political bent to it, whether it's corporate, whether it's a charity, whether it's somebody trying to come on and make their point. So we covered those bits off. The final bit there, taste and decency, that's common sense. And really just think about the time of day, I think, on that one. So some good rules of thumb. Talk about the things you know about. Avoid verbal cul-de-sacs. I have heard one or two presenters in recent times saying something along the following of, well, isn't it awful what's going on in Gaza? It's really terrible. You know, the bombing that's going on, the amount of innocent deaths, you know, it's dreadful and it breaks my heart. But of course, I don't know anything about it. So I better shut up and move on. Really don't do that. If you don't know what you're talking about,
Oh, I'm just going to answer that phone. Sorry, Dave.
I couldn't hear it. Yeah, if you're not appraised of the issues and you don't feel confident to talk about a particular topic or issue from a standpoint of either experience or knowledge, don't go there. Because there's nothing worse than hearing a radio presenter who's supposed to impart information and have some authority and know what they're saying, turn around at the end of talking for 5 minutes about Gaza or the war in Ukraine and going, wow, of course I don't know anything about it. And I have heard that kind of thing coming out, so I would avoid that. So stick to things
Dave,
you can't go wrong.
Dave, can I just add on to that, you know, as the listener, if you're listening to somebody talking on the radio about a particular subject, and Gaza is a good example, you know, it's always so much better if you come at it from a position of strength. I mean, in my own personal circumstances, I can, for example, talk about Northern Ireland because I was born there, brought up there, lived there. I can come at that subject from an absolute position of strength. Or someone like Tim, who lives in Bradford-on-Avon, he can talk about the traffic situation,
Oh,
and
100%.
Mike as well in Bradford-on-Avon, because at the end of the day, you're coming at it from a position of strength and experience.
I agree.
But all
And
of
that's
these
actually
things,
going to be okay on the radio. That's
sorry?
going to be okay on the radio. Also, guys and ladies, if you talk about it from a position of experience and saying, look, speaking as a resident, this is what I experienced today, there's no problem there. You know, as long as you're not bad mouthing or naming and shaming in a way. I think if you just said, I had a bad experience trying to get through town today, the traffic is awful, that's an undeniable experience. That's actually a human experience. You're not going to get into bother for things like that. It's more if you start to go down the route of saying, you know, well, it's a scandal because I know that the people who work on the roads, you know, have got their hands in the till and they're all corrupt. And you name the contractor clearly, and you're laughing because you know it's common. You would get into hot water for that. So, but speaking from experience, you're always going to be fine. So that's okay. But try and avoid any verbal cul-de-sacs. Don't repeat unverified posts, especially if privacy or public order, check official sources. We covered that quite nicely. And don't be afraid to let a guest speak their mind, but challenge the premise of their viewpoint. Be the devil's advocate. Any questions? Look at that. Nearly to time.
Yeah, well done, you. Dave, just getting away from this sort of serious business of all of this, which are really, really helpful. Even when it comes to presenting a show, and you know, you've got a particular artist which comes onto your playlist, it might be Coldplay, for example, and they're not everybody's favorite. But again, you as the presenter shouldn't slam them and say, "Well, weren't they crap at Glastonbury?" Or, you know, am I right? Am I going down the right track here?
There's a general convention in music radio that if you are the presenter, why would you play a track you don't like?
Okay.
Therefore, the general rule of thumb is never criticize the music in radio. Just don't play the track if you don't like it. If you're expressing an opinion, you're going, you know what? That's a great new song from Coldplay there on West Wilts Radio. I really like the track. I thought they performed poorly at Glastonbury for the following reasons, and you give an opinion. Why? That's fine. So you can
Yeah.
associate the two. And I think informed opinion from a music lover is great. You know, I often criticize acts, or I think I slagged off Bananarama from, which is not hard to do. I like some of their songs. I like some of their. I love their song. I love some of their songs. So Cruel Summer, adore it. But then last autumn, I absolutely berated them for a terrible performance at the Radio 2 Party in the Park thing. And I'm not afraid of doing that. And that isn't contentious. That's just cheeky. So
Yes.
what I think where I delineate my stance in terms of presenting is I am cheeky and irreverent, and I would encourage any of you who feel that way within your personality, if you want to do that, now you know you can. And why I've just taken you through the serious stuff there, because once you know all of that stuff, then it's not about how you break the rules or even bend the rules. It's more about having the confidence of knowing, well, actually, all the stuff I want to say doesn't come under those Ofcom rules. There isn't anything particularly contentious. I can't be sued. I can just turn around and go, God, aren't Bon Jovi a pain in the ass? You know, kind of thing. Just because it's Bon Jovi. And be a little bit Jeremy Clarkson about it if you decide you want to be opinionated. And no one's going to come after you if you're just being a bit cheeky and a bit pithy, as long as it isn't causing, as long as it's not deliberate offence, and you're saying John Bon Jovi is a what's it, and you accuse him of something, that could cause distress or harm or damage his reputation professionally. Although interestingly, Trump is an abuser. That's an interesting one. The Time magazine in America actually did place that Donald Trump was an abuser and a racist. And it would appear as though you can't be sued for saying that, although I wouldn't want to test that personally. However, here's one. One of your guests comes on your show and said, Donald Trump is a misogynist. How would you handle that one? Because that feels kind of grey. So I come on your show and I say, Donald Trump is a toxic misogynist. What are you going to say to that?
I'd probably say something along the lines of the fact that he is Marmite to people, and sort of like, he can go down that route and
Divides opinion.
I'd be happy to go with that, I think, and I doubt he'd come after us. I'm pleased to see Tim's calming down after that Bon Jovi comment.
It was Bananarama for me. Yeah,
all the way. I'm glad that we got some musical references in there. Well, actually, Donald Trump has. I mean, I did actually have Kurt Smith on my Tears for Fears special say, toxic masculinity. If Trump comes back next time, he will be a dictator, is what he said, and that's his opinion. And I didn't challenge it. I let that go.
Yeah.
Because I think that's his opinion. And I absolutely let that go. I didn't say, well, he won't be. It's kind of hard. One, it's hard to argue with, and secondly, you're right. I think the Marmite route is a good route to go. He's a divisive character, on both sides. But yeah, it's almost hard. He also, because he's been proved in a civil court to have abused women, actually a misogynistic comment would be quite light touch where he's concerned. Where it occurs with other people, you would have to be more careful. They said that about a member of your community or somebody else, you would have to jump straight on it. But with Trump, there is so much noise out there. I wouldn't worry. And, because that's a global thing. So, it's degrees again. If they said that about your local mayor, you would have to really be hot on that. That's a serious accusation. But where it's Trump, it wouldn't be, an issue particularly. Paul, your hand's up. Sorry.
Just a quick one. I don't want to leave it. I keep people too much longer. It's just a worrying thing with me, really, with social media and blowing up at the moment with all the the opinions about this country and the government and stuff, and how safe are you with social media expressing your own opinion, whether it's political, apolitical, or not, in terms of your other role on Radio Bath or another radio station, community radio station? How
Oh, I
safe
see.
are you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
because at
That's
the
a
moment everything's blowing up,
really
aren't
good
they? Isn't it?
question.
Yeah,
I get
yeah.
asked this question by executives and people in corporate organizations. This really does play into my kind of media training aspect of things. And I always say to them,
Mm.
you can't really divorce the two things. Your public profile and platform of you on social media and
Mm.
you being somebody who represents a radio station are reputational. It's your reputation and it's also the reputation of the radio station, and they are interlinked. And therefore, your own um, sense of responsibility,
Yes. Yeah,
your sense of responsibility to the radio
yeah.
station, you need to be to be careful, like
Okay.
not tweeting when drunk. You can have a political opinion. It doesn't matter if you have a particular political leaning or you support. I mean, Dina Romero presents on Radio Bath. Everyone knows she's a Lib Dem and she campaigns the rest of it. She would have had to have been very careful during the election what she could have said because I think she was standing up against Rees-Mogg.
Yeah, that's right.
They didn't talk about any matters relating to anything like that while she was on air.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
just yeah.
So you
Okay.
can express opinions and you can have political views and you can do
Mm.
all sorts of things on social media, but I would have one eye on the fact that think about the reputation of any organizations that you represent, both in your day job and certainly the radio station.
Mm. It's unpaid or not unpaid?
Yeah,
Because I'm
either. It
unpaid with
doesn't
Radio
matter.
Bath. Either. Doesn't
About-
matter.
It's about public standing in the community, and public
Right.
standing in the community isn't about whether you're paid or not. Public
Okay.
standing in the community can be, somebody has an unpaid mayoral role, which is a civic role, and you can be of very high standing and cause huge reputational issues for your public office,
Yeah. Yeah.
yourself and for your family by saying something contentious. So the same applies if you're a volunteer on a radio station. You do have a bit of a duty of care to your colleagues
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that station in terms of what you state
When it's on social media about the government or not about the government or anything in general.
anything at
Yeah.
all. Anything. Whatever your views are on whether immigration or any of the hot transgender issues, all things that you need to be very careful about if you are piling into social media generally, irrespective of whether or not you would say it on your radio show. Two things can easily be conflated. So that they can be conflated because mainstream media and regular journalists could say, "Hey, look at this guy broadcasting on West Wilts Radio or whatever it is with your transgender views on social." Suddenly they can turn that into community radio presenter. That can erupt into a national scandal for you because
and of course
but they connect you up.
And of course, with people being arrested at the moment for their political views, that's led to say inciting violence and stuff against other communities. I mean, that's slightly different, but it's still in that area, isn't it? Of being opinionated.
Well, that's something that's going down a slightly different route, which is slightly outside the scope of this. But we are we're going into the territory of reputation, your own reputation management. But that is important because your own reputation management and how you conduct yourself, I suppose, on social media as well as on the radio are all important for safeguarding personal and professional reputation in your private life, your jobs, and for that of the radio station, because you don't want to do it any reputational harm. So hopefully that answers that. But we've actually we've crossed into a slightly different area, but all relevant and really good question. So thanks for that. Anybody else?
Div, I'm going to have to go.
Yeah, well, I'm going to do the same. And I'm
So
going to
thank you very much indeed. I hope everybody else has kind of found it really helpful.
Has that been useful?
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, excellent.
Thanks,
Really
Dave.
good. Yeah,
It's very good.
I'm screwed for me live or exorcism show on Thursday, though.
Yeah, the live exorcism show will have to be recorded.
Yeah. gonna have to rewrite that. But
You're going to have to do it as a pre-record and play it out. We know.
absolutely, pre-records is fine. Yeah, that's fine.
You can't. No, just to be clear, you can't do it at all.
No.
And I knew I'd land something with you anyway if you
Yeah.
took nothing else away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, we will make this available to other presenters as well. So let me know.
Brilliant.
But take care and thank you. Thank you
Yeah,
for watching.
thank you, mate.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.